Hey everyone, welcome back to In Her Wallet, a weekly podcast helping women around the world take control of their finances for good and build better financial futures one episode at a time. My name is Sofiia. I am your host, the founder of In Her Wallet, and an accredited investment representative here in Canada. Today, we are talking about the connection between mental health and money. Financial stress, unfortunately, is something that all of us from all walks of life, from all parts of the world, are to experience at some point in their life, especially in times of uncertainty. And there are a lot of causes for financial stress. It can be a loss of job, it can be escalating debt, it can be unexpected expenses, or a combination of all of these factors. But what matters is that financial stress can take a toll on your mental and physical health, your relationships with people, and overall quality of life. So today we're going to highlight how to recognize the patterns of financial stress and how to fight it in small and actionable steps. I'm very excited to have a conversation with Janine Rogan. She is a chartered professional accountant, a woman who is passionate about financial literacy and feminism. Janine has over a decade of experience in personal finance world, 5 years in tech consulting, and 2 of the big 4 accounting firms on her resume. Janine is also an author of the book called The Pink Tax, which just came out in May. So make sure to check it out. And also a friendly reminder that if you like this episode, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, share it with your family and friends, post about it on your social media, or support us through a Buy Me a Coffee link, which you can find in the episode description. Without further ado, let's dive in. Janine, I am so excited to have you on and to have this conversation. Welcome to In Her Wallet podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited for our conversation today.
Me too. It's a very important one, and we haven't talked about mental health on the In Her Wallet podcast yet, so I'm very excited to bring this on. But before we dive in, let's help our community get to know you a bit better. Tell me, what's your go-to coffee order?
Ooh, either I guess for me it really depends on the weather. So if it's cold, I want something warm, like a oat milk latte. But if it's hot, I've been going to an iced Americano with a little bit of coconut milk in it.
Nice. I like that. What about the movie you can rewatch again and again? Do you have one?
I don't. I was just talking about this with my friend. I really don't watch movies more than once. Maybe a childhood favorite, like Legally Blonde or something like that, I could probably watch again. But once I kind of know what's going to happen, I'm kind of not interested in watching it again.
But Home Alone for Christmas, probably.
Yeah, totally. White
Yes.
Christmas is also one that at Christmas we watch over and over again.
Nice. I'm already in the Christmas mood, even though it's August. I'm like mentally preparing
Oh,
myself. Janine, if you could travel anywhere in the world right now, where would that be?
oh, good question. I think Japan is top of my and my husband's list. We've been wanting to go for years and just experience the culture. So I think that would probably be kind of, if I had a plane ticket anywhere in the world, that's where I would go.
For all of the guests that I ask this question here on the podcast, Japan and Italy are 2 of the most popular destinations.
Okay. I've been to
Yes,
Italy and I did love it. And I mean, the wine and the pasta is just so amazing. So I
I
would definitely
know.
go back to Italy as well.
Perfect. Janine, so with that out of the way, for those folks who have not heard of you, could you give us a bit of an intro about what you do and who you are?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the CEO of the Wealth Building Academy, which is a company I founded that aims to educate and empower women to build their wealth and invest in the stock market. I'm a CPA by trade, worked for a number of years at some of the big 4 firms, and then eventually went into tech. And now I work for myself, like I said, and I also am an author and a speaker. My book, The Pink Tax, came out in May of this year, so that's been quite a whirlwind. But through the company, what we really aim to do is teach women through online courses, speaking engagements, workshops, everything they need to know, and all of the conversations they never had about money growing up.
I love that. And I always love having conversations with women who support the same mission as what we do here at In Her Wallet. So I'm excited to have you on. Janine, let's dive into the whole mental health conversation. Obviously, money can sometimes be overwhelming and it can oftentimes make you feel anxious and stressed. So, how can we define the connection between mental health and money?
I think it's probably different for every person depending on their personal circumstances. But I like to go back to, if we remember March 2020 when the pandemic hit, there was a lot of questions up in the air of whether or not there'd be mass layoffs, if people were losing their jobs, how they were going to pay for things. And I think that like instilled a different sense of anxiety almost in our culture around money. And I think it unraveled a few things when it came to mental health and money, because I think for so long people never thought something like this could happen and didn't maybe really understand how it was going to impact their finances. And so there were so many people that were really stressed about money and really stressed about whether or not they were going to lose their job, or if they there was a lot of hiring freezes at that time too, so people couldn't necessarily get jobs. And I think that really just speaks to the impact that money can absolutely have on our mental health. We know that it is the number one cause of divorce. We know that it is incredibly anxious for some people. People will ignore bills because it is so overwhelming. And we know that debt also is connected to depression, especially when people feel like they can't pay off that debt, or they feel negative or shame around some of that as well.
Yes. I like how you started talking about how can money affect our mental health. Before we look at all of these examples, debt, divorces, etc., can we look at how mental health affects our money? Because oftentimes
Mhm.
some people might have mental health issues as well. So how can we identify that connection? And perhaps what are some of the patterns people might recognize in themselves to know that their mental health might be affecting their financial situation?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many examples of this. I mean, it can start with if you're struggling with depression, there it can be challenging to find work. If you are if have untreated ADHD, it can be hard to maintain work. And those are just two examples. I think so often our mental health impacts our ability to earn, and that our earning potential is one of our biggest financial assets in our life, especially as young people. And we're relatively young. I'm still categorizing myself as relatively young.
Good.
But I think it really can impact how we see the world, how we feel we have choice in the world. Our money gives us freedom and the ability to seek help, pay for medications, as well as take much needed breaks. If you don't have a ton of vacation and you're always saving it up for when your child is sick because you're a young parent, you may never get the ability to actually take time away for yourself. And we know that people need the opportunity to recharge and recuperate, but money does give you the ability to do that when you have more of it. So it is, mental health affects money and money affects mental health. I think there are so many connections between the two of them.
Totally. I also think that mental health issues and certain conditions can lead to you overspending, and certain moods can lead to you overspending and making impulsive decisions with your money. Like I know, oftentimes women, like if we go through a breakup or through a divorce, or if we didn't get a promotion at work, or if we did get a promotion at work, all this extreme situations make us use money as a tool, I think, oftentimes to substitute or to make up for a certain situation. So I think that's another lens that we can look at it
Absolutely.
from.
Impulse spending, we've been taught, and this kind of dives into all of the systematic challenges that women face when it comes to money, but we have been taught, I mean, all you have to do is watch Confessions of a Shopaholic. I don't know if you remember that movie, but
Love it.
she had a challenging situation and all she did was spend, because we've been taught that retail therapy is what's going to help us get through that, and that's not really addressing the underlying problem. And when I talk about mental health and money, and I talk about wealth being a type of self self-care in a sense. Having money and building a nest egg is a form of self-care against some of these challenges when it comes to mental health. But impulse spending, as much as I love a bubble bath and a glass of wine, those are not real ways of self-care, other than, I guess, like spending time by yourself. But they're just band-aid solutions to the underlying challenges that maybe our money has impacted us on, or maybe we have money trauma from our childhood that we need to address. And women have been taught for so long that you just, you're going to drink a glass of wine or a bottle of wine with your girlfriends or go shopping, and that's how you're going to solve all your problems. But it really doesn't get to those underlying issues. I'm not saying
Exactly.
anything wrong. I do those things. Like, don't get me
Me
wrong. But
too. Me
and so
too.
no shame, no judgment at all. I just think that there's a deeper like thing that we need to dig into sometimes when it comes around mental health and money, and it doesn't have to necessarily be so surface level.
Totally. I think it's okay to a certain degree. It becomes a problem when it's a consistent pattern that you notice you do when you reach a certain mood level or
Mm-hmm.
state. So I think just recognizing and keeping track of these patterns that you see to make sure you avoid those band-aid situations kind of thing. And obviously, if you recognize that you are in a depressed mood, or that, you use money as a tool to combat some of the states, perhaps seeing a therapist or someone who can help
Absolutely.
you avoid this. Obviously, there is no shame in that. Yes. And I also think if we talk about one last point I want to make about mental health and how it can affect our financial situation, I feel like also if you're feeling depressed, that might make you feel discouraged to manage your money, to
Mm-hmm.
budget, to look at your spending, to look at your bills.
Yeah, it can be so overwhelming. And I mean, there's many examples in many different shows, in the media even, and I'm sure it's happened to many of us, where you ignore that bill, or your credit card statement comes and you have this like thought in the back of your head that you spent more than you should have. And it's like, our first reaction to that is avoidance, right? We're kind of like, oh, this is uncomfortable, or I did something that maybe I don't that future or current me doesn't necessarily agree with. So I'm going to get away from the discomfort, and that kind of can perpetuate, especially if you are challenged with facing some depression. It can just perpetuate and get out of control. And so we want to make sure that we're getting the help we need. There's so much to say on mental health, and I think what's so challenging here in Canada is there's not enough therapists, and most of them charge over $200 an hour, which can be also prohibitive to people getting the help that they need, which I guess in turn is also a connection between mental health and money.
Exactly. So what would you say are some actionable steps, small steps, women who might relate to the feelings we've just described take to help themselves? Because they might also feel shame and anger at
Yeah.
themselves, and they might not be open to sharing about that with their family and friends or husbands or boyfriends. What are some of the things they can do?
Yeah, I think the first thing I always tell people is to know that they're not alone. There are other people in this situation, and that it's not just you against the world. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to tell anybody if you're not comfortable with that. That's a choice that you get to make. But I think the next step is you only have to do one thing at a time. Personal finance is overwhelming in the sense that it uses a lot of financial jargon. There's so much to know. There's books and courses and textbooks, and you don't have to know it all right now. All you have to do is one thing. And if that one thing is opening a bill, that's a step in the right direction. And then I would say, kind of after getting past that initial overwhelm, and maybe addressing some of that shame, your money does not define you. Your net worth does not equal your self-worth. And knowing that money is just a tool that we use, and everybody has a different amount of that tool to allocate, and we just have to do the best we can with what we have. And I think that, remembering that is really grounding and important. And then I would say the last thing is, if you're someone who likes to avoid these things, scheduling once every 2 weeks, half an hour of set aside time for your money when you're at a state that is calm. So maybe it's like Friday mornings, you're not like stressed out, and maybe you light a candle and put on some nice music and make a little ritual out of it. I think that can also be a positive way to interact with money if you've had a lot of negative experiences or you're feeling a lot of stress around your money.
Great tips. Thank you for sharing that, Janine. Let's now look at how financial stress and financial instability can cause problems with our mental health. Do you have any stats that you can share on that and perhaps some examples?
There's lots of statistics out there in terms of the impact that money stress has on people. And it really, I think, depends on where they're at in their life. There was a study that showed 46% of employees really said that financial stress impacted them in their job performance. And so to me, that says like 50% of the population is stressed about money. And I think that's pretty on par with when we look at the statistics around how close people are to not being able to pay a bill. We've seen, it's either 200 or 2,000. I've seen both. People are one emergency away from not being able to pay their bills, and I think that weighs on your mind all the time when things are that close, close to being a real challenge financially. And so again, I think, if half the population is stressed about money, this is something that we need to talk about, because we're human beings, we crave connection. When we start to talk about these things with people we trust, and that's the key there, is you got to find someone that you trust, that is not going to, create a worse scenario for you in terms of stress. But I think that we can start to unpack this shame, this pressure that we put on ourselves to kind of have it all together, or have a perfect financial record. We've all missed a credit card payment and paid interest. We've all paid a bank fee at the ATM. Like, you know what? There's so many personal finance creators out there that will shame you and tell you that that's horrible. But the truth is, like, we have a lot going on, especially as women. And I think it's okay to make mistakes, and we just kind of have to shrug them off and say, like, maybe I'll make a different decision next time. So that was a really long-winded answer that kind of went around in a circle. But I think, financial stress impacts, like I said, 1 in 2 people. So chances are, someone who's stressed about money.
Exactly. And you're not alone. I like how you touched on women specifically. So if we're talking about women and financial stress, once we came out of the pandemic, there was a lot of talk and data showing that women were disproportionately affected by the impact of the pandemic. Can we talk about the most common causes of financial stress and difficulty for women? So you highlighted that oftentimes it can affect our work performance. What might else be
Yeah.
included in that list?
Oh, the list is long. So to start, women, usually mothers, have what we call the mental load. So they're constantly trying to remember everything and think ahead to what needs to happen. So that's already taking our mental capacity. And then if we're adding on a lot of money decisions, that also can kind of grade away at our ability to make decisions. So there's challenges there. We know that 1 in 5 women left the workforce during the pandemic for care reasons. So we haven't set up proper systems in our society to support childcare and elder care. So 1 in 5 women left the workforce. That is going to hinder their earning potential. That's going to hinder their savings potential and their ability to build wealth. And we know that having a nest egg really does help us prevent that stress. So if women are not working, they're not having an income, they might feel the pinch when it comes to monthly payments. We know that most part-time workers are women, and those roles don't have a lot of flexibility when it comes to taking time off to tend to a sick child. So now are you making the decision to pick up your sick child from school? And we know in the pandemic that, it wasn't really an option to just keep them there. You had to go get them right away. Or are you leaving your part-time job and potentially giving up earnings for the day, or getting fired, or whatever? So it really does impact women in so many ways. And it starts with the wage gap. It starts with women are paid less than men. And then it just perpetuates in so many different ways. And women just have less money worldwide. We know that white women have 30% of the worldwide wealth, and women of color have just 2%. So wealth translates into power, power to make decisions, power to impact change. And if we don't have that money, or we're in financially precarious situations, we know that that's going to affect our mental health. And then it kind of just is a vicious cycle and goes from there.
I like what you mentioned about the mental load. I feel like us women were always pulled in so many different directions. I mean, you need to be a good daughter, you need to be a good friend, a good wife, a good mother, and you need to, at the same time, also make sure that you're on path to financial well-being, stability, success, you're saving for future, for
Have
retirement,
a
you're investing.
career. Yeah.
A lot to
It's
take on.
exhausting.
Yes. And I just watched the Barbie movie yesterday, and yes, she was always, I'm always having the best day. Every day is the best day. In real life, it's not like that, unfortunately. And I mean, I like the idea
No.
that they try to. No, they one of the main messages is that in real life we constantly experience change, and I mean, money, as you mentioned, is the tool for power and the tool that helps us create the lives that we want. So if we constantly are experiencing change, um, that might affect our financial situation as well. So you mentioned earlier about debt, and
Yes.
debt is one of the biggest sources of financial stress. Can we talk about debt and how perhaps having good financial habits can help us take control of financial situations and feel better?
Hmm. Yeah, and I think debt is a really interesting one because as we are the middle class or the working class, we've been sold this narrative that debt is bad. And I'm not saying that I don't think debt can be good or bad. I think it's kind of amoral. But when we look at certain types of debt, high interest debt, so credit card debt, um, payday loans, those are more challenging types of debt that hurt working class people. So there is a piece of this that I think like our society has set up to hurt people who are in their most vulnerable positions. But I also think there's this notion that's been sold to the middle class that you can't have any debt. Like pay off your mortgage immediately, pay off your student loans immediately. And if we actually look and shift our perspective to kind of the top 10% or the top 1%, they are not paying off their houses. They are probably financing their cars because they know that their money could be working hard for them and actually building wealth, instead of just paying off that house and then having kind of nothing to show for it. So I think the rich call that leverage, but we are very obsessed with paying off our debt. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't pay off your debt. I just don't know if we need to have this like obsession with getting our mortgage to zero when we know that the upper echelon of people are also leveraging debt to finance things in their life so that they can use their money to enjoy things, to go on trips, or to invest in the stock market and make better returns than the interest rate on their mortgage. So to me, debt is a really interesting one because I think different classes of people have been kind of told different things about debt. And I think it also comes back to how we were raised. Because if you grew up in a very wealthy family, you might have seen like, oh yeah, we just use debt as leverage. Billionaires do that all the time with their companies. But if you grew up in a low income household, you might have seen debt take a toll on your family's finances, and maybe there wasn't enough food on the table, sometimes. So I think it is interesting to look at it across different classes and try to figure out why you feel a certain way about debt. Was it your childhood upbringing? Was it kind of the story we've been sold in our current society, or what is it? And I think when we start to dig into those questions, we can really start to separate ourselves again from our money. I tell people your net worth does not equal your self-worth. They're two different things. Money is just a number, and we have to disconnect them and stop feeling shame or embarrassment around our money.
I Well, I have a few thoughts from your
Okay.
answer just now. First one is that I like what you mentioned. You don't have to necessarily pay off your debt. Perhaps an actionable tip here is looking for ways how your money can work harder to earn you more interest elsewhere so that you can use that payments that you receive to pay off your debt, but perhaps also grow your wealth slowly
Mhm.
over time. Um, in fact, I see, as you mentioned, my fiance, he's a portfolio manager. I see him do that all the time with his clients. Even though they have money to buy a house right away, they have that in their bank account or cash.
Yep.
He suggests them do otherwise because he knows that the market or some other financial tools can help them earn more money. So, I mean, I
Absolutely.
haven't actually talked about this on the podcast, so I'm very happy that we highlighted that. And then another thing you brought up is that net worth is not your self-worth. I personally, I think, have gone through this journey when I quit my stable paying job and I didn't have that stable income anymore. I couldn't I obviously had to cut on certain expenses, on certain luxuries, and that really affected my well-being. I think as women, we like to treat ourselves to certain things, and I think there is such a fine line in helping yourself recognize that if you don't have those things, that doesn't necessarily take away from you or make you smaller.
Yeah, I think it's really challenging for anybody, and I've gone through this as well, but it's really challenging to go from a certain type of lifestyle back down to a lifestyle you maybe had when you were a student or when you were just starting out. It can be really challenging to go back that way. And I try to tell myself when I'm in that mindset of like, oh my God, like scarcity kicks in and I'm like, we have no money. And, we've all had those thoughts, but I try to tell myself like, this is just a chapter in the book. You always have the ability to earn more income. You will find, a way to do that, or you'll get another job if you've been laid off. I think we have to try to remind ourselves that that money doesn't define us, and yes, it is absolutely a powerful tool, and we can do a lot with it. But just having more of it also isn't going to make you feel better. We know that people continue to always want more. There's, like they say, oh, once I get $1 million, I'll be happy. But if you're not addressing the underlying, causes and root cause to why you're unhappy, I don't think any amount of money is ever going to fix that. And I'm sure we've all been in that job where we're like, oh, I don't get paid enough to do this job. And then they give you a raise and it doesn't matter because the job sucks or the manager sucks or whatever. And no amount of money is actually going to make you like that job or have a good experience. So I think, separating ourselves from our money, and working on our inner self, working on our mental health, working on all of those things is so important and will translate into your ability to earn more, your ability to separate yourself from your money, to make those decisions. But we can't let money be the driving factor all of the time.
Yes, I the one thought I keep holding in my mind throughout our conversation is that it's very important to connect to your why, what
Mm,
you want to achieve in life, and then as you mentioned, just making sure that every step you take is in the right direction. Sometimes it's a step backwards. Like for example, for me, leaving the corporate industry to pursue building a legacy in the way where you help women and, follow that passion of yours, at the end of the day, it'll get you closer to your why, even though right now it might be a step backward.
yeah. And it feels scary and it feels overwhelming. And it's okay to have all of those thoughts and feelings and acknowledge them, because if you shove them down, it's also not going to be a good situation.
Exactly. But sometimes treating yourself again to something nice that might require financial expense, that's okay too, because if that's something that makes you happy, you should not be
Totally.
avoiding or,
Yeah, I think that,
canceling those
there's a
things.
conversation around, and I was telling people this at the beginning of the pandemic is, if you can buy something that is going to give you joy in these times when we were in the pandemic, nobody was doing anything. Like, and if that's like a really expensive coffee maker, but you're going to enjoy that coffee maker and it's going to be like a ritual for you in the morning, like go ahead. If buying a latte every day, like it's so funny. We see all these like TikToks where it's like, you know, I didn't buy a latte for 2 weeks and I saved $60,000. Like that, we know the latte factor is not true.
Oh
Like
my God.
maybe back in the
Yeah.
day, that's fine. But if that latte gives you joy, like go for it. But if it doesn't, then don't buy it. And I think what is money if not to enjoy it, and enjoy some of the things it can afford you. And of course, like everything is relative and every situation is personal. So, if you're in serious high interest debt, talking to a professional might be the next best step. But if you're, just really stressed about and spending money, because that's also something that we see, like this money hoarding, where people don't want to ever spend and ever enjoy anything. Like I would argue, like, what is the point of that? You're working so hard for your money, put it to work, but then enjoy it for sure.
Exactly, exactly. One last thing I want to touch base on before we wrap up the episode is talking about how social media these days might affect
Mm.
our financial stress and our feelings around money. What's your take on that?
I think Instagram is really good at marketing products to people. And I always try to bring myself back to, like, what is this person trying to sell? And, that applies to finance creators in our space as well. What are they trying to sell? What is their bias? And does it kind of fit an alignment with my values? I think we've all been caught where we've seen an Instagram ad or whatever. I have to have that. And you buy it. And then it shows up at your house and you're like, I don't even remember purchasing that. So I think social media influences us to spend more for sure. And that's where I think content creators in the personal finance space hopefully continue to do a good job to empower people to make different decisions with their money, or allow them to, ditch the shame around spending on certain things, and work some of that fun into their budget. But I think there is still a lot of work to do when it comes to how social media impacts our purchasing, because they do a really good job of it, right? Like we've all been influenced, I'm sure.
Yes, and I think social media also influences us to compare ourselves to others.
Yeah,
And more often than not, that makes us feel bad, perhaps, about ourselves or our lives, because on social media, everything is glam and glitter. So maybe keeping in mind the thought that, that is not the standard norm, or
totally.
that eventually you will get there, like looking at it from a lens of motivation and inspiration and not from a scarcity mindset. I think that's key as well.
Yeah, I mean, the quote is like, comparison is the thief of all joy. And it totally is. I think we see people doing things. We don't know how they've funded it. Maybe they were given, $1 million from their parents. Maybe they're barely making ends meet. People show their highlight reel. And I think we need to remember that. And then also, when it comes to comparison, we know that it impacts your money. There's a really interesting study done that shows for every $1,000 your neighbor wins in lottery winnings, you have a 2.4% more likely chance of going bankrupt. So as your neighbors, or the Joneses or whoever are spending more, maybe they won the lottery, now they have a nice new truck, a hot tub, and you're seeing that from your house or social media or whatever, that really impacts your ability to spend. And I think that it's such an interesting statistic that you have a more likely chance of going bankrupt if your neighbor wins the lottery. So I think that those are also important things to keep in mind. And I think that what is so important about that is recognizing it, because if we recognize it, we can stop that behavior. Am I buying this because I actually want it, or am I buying it because I'm not feeling adequate compared to my neighbor? And why is that?
I also read a stat actually on TikTok, funny enough, yesterday, that getting struck by a lightning is 4 times more common than winning a lottery. Can you
Wow.
imagine that? That's
I don't want to
like,
get
that
struck
just
by
blew my
lightning,
mind
but
off.
yeah,
Yes,
I mean, it's not very likely to happen. And
no,
it's not a great retirement strategy either.
totally. Janine, what is financial freedom to you?
Flexibility for me, having the flexibility to travel, to work in different places, to spend time with my kid, and really be able to make the choices that I want to make, not because a corporation is telling me to do certain things or someone is telling me to do certain things. So I think freedom is freedom of choice is really what it comes down to for me. And money, like I said, is a tool that will allow me to do those things.
Are you able to share any tools and resources that you think would be great for women to get to financial freedom and that freedom of choice?
Yeah, I think I'm going to plug my book. The Pink Tax is a great resource to, I think, start to critically look at your finances. I have a free checklist on my website. I'll make sure that you get the link for that. That it's 30 things that you can do to kind of look at your finances. And like I said at the beginning, you just need to pick one to start. And if you pick one every month, at the end of a year, you're going to have 12 things completed. And that sounds so simple, but I think it really does help move the needle forward. There are lots of great resources online that are free and paid. And I think even following content creators on Instagram that really focus on sharing and educating with their followers, I think is a great way to get started.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that. And Janine, thank you so much for being with us today. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I am confident that it will be an impactful one for our listeners here at In Her Wallet.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you for having me. This was an awesome conversation.
Well, that is it. Thank you all for joining us today. If you like this episode, please make sure to share it with your family and friends and whoever you think might find it useful. Again, you can support the show by leaving us a 5-star review, by sharing it on your social media, or by supporting us through Buy Me a Coffee link in the episode description. As always, I want you to give yourself credit for showing up for yourself and your future, because every time you do that, you increase what's financially possible for you. Thank you all, and I will see you next week.